The road cut through the desert like a forgotten scar from civilization. No headlights ahead, no trail behind, just the constant sound of crickets and the wind dragging sand along the asphalt edges. The dashboard clock read 10:47 p.m. when Hannah Miles realized that the solitude of that night wasn't like the others. There was something different in the air, an almost imperceptible vibration, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Crescent Valley slept under an immense sky, stitched with motionless stars and a moon that seemed to watch everything in silence. There, people learned early that time moved slowly, and that mystery was part of the landscape. Hannah was one of those people, a 27-year-old waitress, tired of serving travelers who passed through the town and never returned. The same diner, the same voices, the same stories told to fill the void. The radio in her car, a 1981 model, crackled with interference. Between the static, an old song began to play, Blue Hotel by Chris Isaak. She hummed absent-mindedly, tapping her fingers on the steering wheel, when a voice interrupted the melody. Unidentified lights were seen over the eastern canyon of Crescent Valley. Residents report metallic glows and strange sounds coming from the sky. She frowned, smiled crookedly. Another UFO story, she murmured, and turned the dial until she found another station. The laugh that escaped her was brief, almost nervous, but soon the car coughed. The engine sputtered, the dashboard lights flickering in a weak, dying glow. The sound died completely, the headlights went out, and the darkness swallowed her. Hannah pulled over to the shoulder, her heart racing. She tried turning the key, nothing. Just the dry click of the dead engine. Outside, the wind kicked up dust, and the desert seemed bigger than ever. That's when she saw something. A small, motionless silhouette a few meters from the road. She hesitated. Fear came quickly, instinctively. But there was something in the stillness of that form that made her get out of the car, driven by a mix of compassion and curiosity. The sand scratched at her ankles. The air smelled of iron and distant rain. As she approached, she saw it wasn't a child. But it also wasn't something she could call human. The skin was translucent, almost like thin glass, and beneath it pulsed a faint bluish light, like the glow of a submerged flame. The creature was breathing with difficulty, eyes closed, small hands trembling as if searching for something invisible in the air. Hannah took a step back. The entire desert seemed to watch the scene, suspended. The instinct to run screamed inside her, but the older instinct, to care, spoke louder. She took off her jeans jacket and wrapped the small body carefully. The touch was cold, but there was warmth in the wrists, a warmth that slowly climbed through her fingers, like a signal. Without thinking, she opened the car door and laid it on the back seat. It's okay, she whispered, not knowing who she was saying it to. The radio, which had been dead, suddenly turned on. The same song, Blue Hotel, started playing again, but now, backwards. The sound distorted, the human voice inverted, as if something wanted to undo time. Hannah turned slowly. In the rearview mirror, the road was empty. No headlights, no movement, just the reflection of her own breathing. She tried starting the car again. This time the engine responded. A click, a spark, and the lights illuminated the asphalt once more. But there was nothing left where the silhouette had lain before, just faint marks in the sand, as if the wind had dragged a body that didn't want to be found. For a few seconds, Hannah thought of driving straight into town, forgetting everything, pretending nothing had happened. But when she looked at the back seat, the small creature was still there, breathing faintly, wrapped in her jacket. And then, for the first time, she felt, not fear, but presence, a dense electric sensation, as if something had chosen her. That night, no one imagined that a simple school backpack would change everything. The old Miles family barn was 2 kilometers from town, surrounded by dry fields and a wooden fence that time no longer held together. Since her grandfather's death, no one had entered it. The roof tiles creaked with the wind, and the smell of rust and dust was thick like a memory that refused to leave. That's where Hannah took the small being, her heart pounding in her chest and her hands shaking too much to hold the keys. She lit a lantern and laid it on an old blanket, the same one her grandfather used on cold nights to watch the sky. The being breathed with difficulty, its pale skin reflecting the yellowish light in metallic tones. In its chest, something pulsed irregularly, a blue light that seemed to want to flicker out and reignite at the same time. Hannah knelt beside it, trying to clean the wounds with a damp cloth. "I don't know who you are, but it seems like you don't want to be found either," she whispered. Her voice choked. The creature didn't respond, but its eyelids trembled. Between its thin fingers, it held a small object, a sphere the size of a walnut, made of a metal Hannah had never seen. The surface changed color, pulsing from inside out, as if breathing along with the being. She reached out, and on impulse, touched the sphere. A high-pitched sound pierced the barn like a sustained violin note in the air. The lamps flickered. Outside, the wind stopped. For a second, the world hung in suspension. Then, the sound ceased, and the being relaxed, as if it had received what it needed. Outside, the sky began to change. The stars twinkled, and a bluish streak crossed the horizon. The neighbor's cattle mooed restlessly. Hannah turned off the lantern and stayed still, listening. The sound coming from the field was strange. A low frequency, almost inaudible, as if the air was vibrating in another tone of reality. She turned and, gazing at the backpack she'd left on the table, noticed something she didn't remember putting there. A small rusted metal cylinder, an old gift, the amulet her grandfather had given her as a child. He said he'd found it after the storm that fell from the sky in 1952. Hannah had never truly believed it, but she'd kept it as a memento. Now, under the living sphere's light, that rusted piece of metal emitted a faint glow. The two pieces, the new and the old, pulsed in the same rhythm. She approached slowly, fascinated and scared. She placed her grandfather's piece next to the sphere and watched them vibrate, almost as if they recognized each other. The creature's breathing became calmer, deeper. Silence returned, but it didn't last long. A shrill sound pierced the air, different from anything Hannah had ever heard. Not wind, not metal, not a human voice. It was something between a whisper and a living frequency. The sphere's light intensified, casting reflections on the walls, and in the barn's shadows, something began to move. Hannah froze. The floorboards vibrated, and the air smelled of ozone. Slender silhouettes emerged from the door cracks, tall, thin, moving with unnatural fluidity. Their outlines weren't defined. They seemed made of light and shadow at once. She backed up until she hit the wall, her heart racing. The figures entered, gliding like solid smoke. They approached the small being lying on the blanket. No words, no sound. Just slow, almost ritualistic gestures. One of the figures extended a hand and opened Hannah's backpack. Inside, it found the old cylinder, the same one her grandfather had kept for decades. As soon as they touched it, the air in the barn changed. It became heavy, dense, as if time was holding its breath. The lights from the sphere and the cylinder connected, forming a single pulse. The visitors stepped back. The color of their skin, if that's what it was, began to change, darkening, pulsing with fear. But the fear wasn't hers, it was theirs. Hannah understood in that instant. That object, something she'd carried since childhood, wasn't a gift. It was a warning. Before we continue, if this video has hooked you this far, it's a sign that you feel the call of the unknown. So, take advantage now. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and tell us in the comments, do you believe we're really alone in the universe? The early morning hours advanced in silence, but the time inside the barn seemed to no longer obey human rules. The lantern, fallen by the stairs, still flickered at irregular intervals, and each flash revealed elongated faces, enormous eyes, and a liquid glow crossing the air. Hannah was motionless. The small being, the one she'd found on the road, was now standing, surrounded by the others. Her breathing was short, and yet she felt something in her had quieted, as if fear had lost its power. One of the visitors, the tallest, tilted its head toward her. No sound came from its mouth, but Hannah felt an electric impulse cross the space between them, something that didn't come from outside, but from within her own mind. Images began to form, not like dreams, but like memories that had never belonged to her. First came the sand, vast deserts transforming into gardens full of luminous structures. Beings with iridescent skin walked among humans, exchanging symbols, touching the ground, planting columns of light into the soil. Then the sky tore open and the columns went dark. The glow was replaced by darkness, and the sound of thousands of human voices screaming was lost in the wind. Hannah fell to her knees, clutching her head. The visions came in waves, and then she saw something more. A man with a dust-covered face, standing under a storm. He carried the same cylinder that now lay before her, and she recognized him. It was her grandfather, The visitor's touch made the metallic sphere glow again, and the ancient artifact began to vibrate. The two pieces spun around each other, bound by an invisible magnetism, emitting a low, constant hum. The light reflected on Hannah's face, and for an instant, she had the impression that the sphere pulsed to the rhythm of her own heart. The images returned, more intense, her grandfather younger, walking through an improvised base in the desert, surrounded by wreckage and frightened men. He held the cylinder, and a voice, or something like it, whispered in his mind, "Keep it. One day the blood will recognize the sound." She saw the same man years later, sitting on the porch, watching the sunset over the Nevada mountains. The same silent gaze she remembered from childhood. The grandfather who never told anything, but always knew too much. And then, the images dissolved. The barn became just the barn again. The lights ceased, the figures retreated, but the sensation remained. An invisible current connecting the present to the past, the blood to the metal, the human to what came from the stars. Hannah stood with difficulty, her eyes teary. "What do you want from me?" she asked. The answer came not in words, but in a sequence of sensations: respect, fear, reverence. They looked at her like one looks at an ancient mirror. One of the visitors extended its arm. From its translucent skin, a small particle of light detached and floated to the sphere. Upon touching the artifact, the sound changed, now softer, almost a melody. The light formed floating symbols in the air, patterns that seemed like maps, but also resembled constellations. And among them all, there was one symbol she recognized: Orion's belt. Her grandfather used to draw that pattern on the ground whenever he told stories about the day the sky fell. He said that the three stars are the link, and one day the link will shine again. Hannah approached the light, her breathing heavy. The ancient artifact seemed alive, pulsing, reacting to her presence. The figures around bowed, not in fear, but in reverence for something that had waited a long time. The voice in her mind returned, clearer now. "We did not come to conquer. We came to remember." And in that instant, Hannah understood. This wasn't an invasion. It was a return. Humanity had touched this mystery before, and the key to reopening the link lay in the blood of those who dared to believe, and then forgot. The sphere in the cylinder stopped vibrating. The figures began to dissolve, fragmenting into particles of light. The small being she'd saved turned to her one last time. In its eyes, there was a reflection, the same tired, compassionate human gaze. When the last glow disappeared, Hannah was alone in the barn. The sphere rested beside the cylinder, now cold, still. The wind returned to blow, bringing the distant sound of the town's bells. She breathed deeply. Outside, the first trace of dawn scratched the sky, and for the first time in her entire life, she felt that the emptiness of Crescent Valley finally had meaning. The sun rose over Crescent Valley as if nothing had happened. The mountains cast long shadows over the dry fields, and the air had the usual smell: dust, coffee, and rust. But something had changed, even if no one could explain what. The local radios began broadcasting confused reports: agitated sheep, burned transformers, lights seen over the canyon. The town, small and accustomed to sleeping with unlocked doors, now whispered. At the diner where she worked, Hannah washed mugs with trembling hands. The previous night replayed in her mind like a movie she couldn't pause. The spheres, the light, the figures, the small being's gaze. Everything mixed with the reversed music and the sound of the still wind. She tried to act normal, but the silence among the customers was different. They spoke softly, casting glances when she passed. The door's bell tinkled, and Sheriff Nolan entered. A broad man, with a sun-marked face and an air of someone who'd seen it all. He leaned his elbows on the counter, watching Hannah with rehearsed calm. "I heard the lights appeared near the Miles farm," he said, stirring his coffee with a spoon. "Were you around there last night?" She hesitated. "I was driving home. The car stalled. That's all." "And did you see anything?" Hannah looked up, and the reflection in the window behind the sheriff showed the distant canyon, still wrapped in a bluish haze that hadn't dissipated. "Something I can't explain without sounding crazy." The sheriff sighed. "Crescent Valley is the kind of place where everyone already seems a little crazy." He left some coins on the counter and left, but his gaze lingered, a gaze that said more than any official report. The following hours were a parade of rumors. Someone said they'd seen shadows walking over the Miles barn. Another swore a radio picked up a strange signal. A female voice saying, "Don't be afraid." Young people showed up on the road with cameras, hoping to capture the next Roswell. Hannah's name passed from mouth to mouth, between jokes and conspiracy theories. That afternoon, when the wind returned from the desert, she realized people no longer looked at her the same way. It was as if everyone had decided she was part of the mystery, a witness, or worse, a liar. Back at the farm, the barn was exactly as she'd left it. The lights had vanished. The sphere and cylinder remained on the table, inert, like two pieces of metal without a story. But the air still had a strange density, as if guarding an invisible echo. Hannah ran her fingers over the sphere's surface. Cold. Dead. And yet, her heart raced. That's when she felt it, a shiver, a presence. She looked at the door. Nothing. She looked again. Still nothing. And then, without a sound, the air before her seemed to fold, like a sheet pulled by a breeze. 3 figures emerged, floating between the dust and the dimness. But there was a difference. Their bodies were translucent, almost made of mist. The forms trembled, as if existing in a space between the real and the impossible. Hannah took a step forward. "Why did you come back?" No answer. Just a vibration in the ground. The sphere's light reignited, faint but alive, and suddenly she realized the figures weren't looking at her, but through her. Frightened, she turned toward the window. Outside, the field was empty. No sound, no movement. And yet, she could feel their gaze on her, even with her eyes closed. Her mind split in two. One part still human, seeking explanations. The other, already touched by something that didn't belong to this world. And then, the truth revealed itself with almost cruel clarity. No one else could see them. The figures were there, but only for her. The link, somehow, had closed. In the next instant, the shadows vanished like smoke. Only the sound of a faint wind remained, and the sensation that something was waiting, not outside the world, but inside her. Twilight descended over Crescent Valley, tinting the sky a melancholic orange. The clouds stretched like veils over the mountains, and the wind carried a distant hum, a sound Hannah already knew, the same from the night it all began. She walked slowly toward the barn, with measured steps, as if she knew something awaited her inside. The whole town seemed to breathe at another frequency, and every shadow seemed to watch her. When she pushed the door open, the air changed. The barn's interior was colder than it should be, and the darkness had its own glow, a faint, alive, pulsing luminescence. The metallic sphere rested in the center of the packed dirt floor, as if it had moved on its own. Hannah felt her body shiver from the nape of her neck to her feet. Without warning, the sphere's light grew. Not violently, but organically, almost compassionately. One of the visitors emerged from it, outlined by liquid light contours, its eyes shining like reflections of another sun. It didn't move. It just watched her, in silence. Hannah took a step forward. "You came back." No audible response. Just vibrations in the air, like waves crossing the skin. The light expanded and touched the ground, forming symbols. A circle, then a sequence of vertical lines and a word, or something resembling one. Decide. She blinked, her heart pounding. Decide what? The answer came not in sound, but in images. The first showed Earth, spinning in silence, surrounded by small points of light, each connected to another by almost invisible threads. Then, the artifact in her hands, the key, the link, the portal, and then 2 possibilities. The object shattering into dust. The cycle ended, silence returning or the light opening again, uniting worlds. The figures multiplied around her, forming a perfect circle. The voices, not human, but not completely alien, whispered inside her mind. Destroy it and the bond is lost forever. Activate it and the channel opens. But the price is forgetting who you were. The ground vibrated. The sphere rose slowly, floating to the level of her chest. Hannah felt the air vibrate in her lungs, and something deeper, more ancient, began to awaken, as if a part of her, dormant since birth, began to remember. She saw her grandfather's face, the porch, the desert, the sound of crickets. He smiled, a sad smile, and said, "The sky keeps promises that only the stubborn can hear." The memory hit her hard. Tears welled up in her eyes. She understood what he'd done. He'd kept the artifact not to protect it from the world, but to protect her from it. The blood, the legacy, the invisible inheritance. It was her call. It always had been. The sphere pulsed before her, like a heart made of light. "And if I say no?" she asked, her voice trembling. The mental echo returned a single phrase. "Then the cycle will continue, until someone says yes." The silence that followed seemed eternal. The wind ceased. Even the sound of her own body seemed distant. She looked at the figures around, beautiful as they were terrible, ancient as fear itself. She realized that despite the difference, there was something human in them, eyes that understood loneliness. Hannah breathed deeply. "If I accept, what happens to me?" This time, the images came gently. A field of stars, rivers of light crossing the cosmos, human voices, thousands of them, intertwined with the visitors, singing in unison a melody that seemed without beginning or end. A world where fear wasn't the end of curiosity, but the beginning of faith. And at the center of it all, her. Not as human, not as being. Just consciousness, memory, continuity. The figures stepped back, making space. The sphere emitted a deep sound, a grave note that seemed to come from the soil itself. The energy in the air intensified. Hannah took a step, then another. She stopped before the light. She closed her eyes. "I accept." The burst of light that followed wasn't destruction, but birth. The light enveloped everything, the ground, the air, the barn, the night. And when it dissipated, the space was empty. The sphere rested on the ground again, still, cold. The wind crossed the wall cracks, carrying away the last trace of their presence. And outside, the canyon began to sing. The clock read 11:09 p.m. when the wind began to change. It was a strange wind, not blowing from the desert, but from the valley itself, as if the air was breathing. The moon was shrouded in a bluish haze that seemed to emanate from the ground, and the horizon flickered in brief, silent flashes, like lightning without thunder. It was September 14th, the night when everything would align. Hannah walked alone to the canyon, following the same path her grandfather had taken decades before. The backpack hung from one shoulder, and inside it, the artifact. Cold, heavy, but pulsing with something that wasn't just energy. The sound of the world seemed different that night. Even the crickets had fallen silent, and the coyotes, always restless, had vanished. When she reached the highest point, the canyon opened before her like a living abyss. The wind blew from within, rising in currents that smelled of metallic rain and ancient earth. Hannah stopped, her heart beat in sync with the artifact's hum, which began to emit a faint glow through the backpack. She knelt, removed the object, and placed it on a smooth rock. The metal reacted immediately, vibrating with a sound that blended with the wind. 3 columns of light descended from the sky. Perfect, vertical, shimmering like liquid rivers of energy. The sand around her began to move, drawing geometric patterns on the ground. The figures appeared. 3, then 5, then a dozen. They emerged from the air, the glow, the silence itself. They surrounded her with reverence. The small being she'd saved was among them, now standing, its gaze fixed on her. Hannah felt her legs weaken, but there was no fear, just a deep serenity, as if she were finally in the right place. The artifact levitated. Slowly it rose a few centimeters and began to spin. From its metallic surface emerged a structure of light, a living geometry, pulsing, like a flower opening in space. Gentle rays escaped its edges, connecting to the columns descending from the sky. The air vibrated. The sound grew. It wasn't noise, it was voice. Thousands of voices, human and non-human, ancient, as if echoing through time. Hannah raised her eyes, and for an instant saw not the sky, but an ocean of lights moving slowly, breathing together. She recognized fragments of faces, memories, dreams she'd never lived. She felt herself dissolve, as if her body was no longer a boundary, but a passage. She wanted to resist. She wanted to say she wasn't ready yet, that there were still questions. But the light was patient, and the answer came without sound. It's not about being ready. It's about remembering. The energy columns pulsed with intensity. The wind swirled in circles, lifting sand and sparks. The artifact floated above her head, and a line of light descended from its center, touching her chest. The touch didn't burn, it warmed. It was the same warmth she'd felt on the road, when she held the small being in her arms. Everything expanded. The sound, the light, her very consciousness. She saw the past and future folding over her. She saw her grandfather's eyes smiling. She saw herself as a child, looking at the sky and asking what lay beyond the clouds. And she heard the answer, not from outside, but from within. You always knew. Her body began to glow, first her fingers, then her arms, then her entire outline. The human form dissolved into waves of light, becoming part of the same fabric enveloping the valley. For a moment, everything stopped. No sound, no wind, just silence. And then one last flash, an explosion of light so intense the entire canyon seemed to disappear. When the light faded, there was no one there anymore. The rock where she'd knelt still trembled, warm. The artifact rested on it, cold again, still, as if nothing had happened. In the sky, the 3 columns of light rose once more, then slowly dissipated among the clouds, and the desert breathed again. Dawn in Crescent Valley came silent, almost respectful. The sky had the pale color of grey dissolved in blue, and the town awoke slowly, unaware that something irreversible had happened during the night. The power lines were burned, the radio silenced, and the televisions displayed only a white static band that seemed to breathe. On the main street, residents exchanged wordless glances. Some claimed to have seen the sky open in 3 lines. Others said it was just an electrical storm. But no one could explain the animal's silence, the disappearance of sounds, the way the air had seemed to vibrate. At the diner, the counter was empty. Hannah's chair, where she always hung her apron, remained untouched. Sheriff Nolan arrived early, with deep bags under his eyes and cold coffee in hand. Gone, was all he could say. No one asked who. Everyone knew. At the station, the report would be simple. Disappearance of Hannah Miles. Last sighting, September 14th, approximately 11 p.m. No signs of struggle, no clues, no trace of flight. Just her car abandoned by the roadside, key in the ignition, and the radio playing an impossible melody, Blue Hotel, but in reverse, like an inverted memory. As the town tried to carry on, the Miles farm remained isolated. The barn, with its doors open, exhaled cold air, and the dust moved as if breathing. It was the sheriff who found the backpack. It was on the floor by the wooden stairs. Inside, only 2 things: a notebook and a cassette tape. The notebook had dust-stained pages and drawings of constellations. On the last pages, hurried notes, almost poetic. They didn't come to take anything. They came to return what we lost. The key isn't the metal, it's the memory. When the wind stops, listen to the sound of what remains. The cassette tape was marked with a faded sticker, September 14th. The sheriff took it to the office and, with trembling hands, placed it in an old recorder. After a few seconds of static, Hannah's voice filled the room. It was calm, firm, almost serene. If they return, don't be afraid. Just bring something human. It's all they don't have. Silence. Then the sound of wind and a faint murmur. Something like distant laughter, or perhaps the echo of voices singing. The tape ended there. The sheriff sat motionless for minutes. When he left, he said nothing. In the following days, the rumors began. Some said that on certain early mornings, the barn's light turned on by itself, even with the wiring cut. Others swore they heard Hannah's voice on the radio waves, between stations, repeating words no one could understand. The elders remembered her grandfather, from when he spoke of the storm that fell from the sky in 1952. They said perhaps what he'd seen back then had returned to fetch what was left unfinished. But among all the rumors, one detail remained the same. No one felt fear. There was something different in that absence. A strange sense of peace, as if the mystery had taken only what was necessary and left, in its place, a promise. Weeks passed, and Crescent Valley returned to its routine. But those who looked at the sky carefully swore they saw, from time to time, 3 streaks of light crossing the clouds, always in the quietest early mornings, always in the same direction, the canyon. And when the wind blew from there, it carried a low rhythmic sound, like the beat of a heart that no longer belonged to this world. The years passed like sand blown by the desert. Crescent Valley continued to exist on the map, a small, forgotten blotch between the mountains, where time drags and stories take the form of legend. Hannah Miles's name became a whisper, a roadside tale, a myth told around campfires by travelers who swore they'd seen the lights over the valley. The children who grew up hearing these stories learned to look at the sky differently. Some nights, the canyon still lights up in silence, 3 columns of light that rise and fall rhythmically, dissolving into the darkness as if breathing. To some, it's just an atmospheric phenomenon. To others, it's the reminder that there are boundaries fear can't guard forever. On one such night, a group of kids played near the old Miles barn, now in ruins. The wind rattled the loose boards, and the echo of the past seemed to vibrate between the timbers. One of them kicked something metallic, half buried in the sand. He knelt, brushed off the dirt, and revealed a fragment, small, silvery, marked with symbols that didn't resemble human letters. They took the object to the canyon. When they placed it on a stone, it reacted, a short flash, almost imperceptible, as if awakening for an instant. The children recoiled, scared, but the glow wasn't threatening. It was warm, serene, like the touch of an ancient memory trying to surface. A girl, with big eyes and tousled hair, approached closer than the others. She touched the tip of her fingers to the metal and smiled without knowing why. "It feels alive," she murmured. The wind blew from within the canyon, lifting dust and a faint sound, the same whisper many swore to hear since Hannah's disappearance. The boys ran off laughing, leaving the fragment there, solitary under the moonlight. But anyone who stayed a little longer would have heard a voice, faint, distant, feminine. "Don't be afraid." That same night, a trucker crossed the main road, listening to shortwave radio. The static interrupted the usual broadcast, and for seconds, the same voice pierced the sound. "Do you remember who you are?" He braked, looked at the sky, and saw the 3 lights forming a perfect triangle over the valley. When he blinked, they vanished. The story's imaginary camera rises, slowly ascending over Crescent Valley. Below, the canyon sleeps wrapped in blue mist. The columns of light flicker once more, like candles lit in homage to the invisible. The wind sweeps the valley and carries an echo, soft, human, familiar. "Perhaps Hannah Miles wasn't taken," says the narrator, in a low, reverent tone. "Perhaps she returned home, to a home that only the brave remember exists." The sound blends with the wind. The imaginary screen darkens. The stars remain, fixed, eternal. And in the final instant, an almost imperceptible voice whispers between the sound waves. "Bring something human. It's all they don't have." If this story touched something inside you, share this video. Leave in the comments what you believe happened to Hannah. And if you also feel there's something out there, maybe you've already started hearing the call,